Leah, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'd just like to ask you a few questions about your experience of coming on the kindertransport
Yes.
from Prague, and also a bit about how your life unfolded in Britain, and then a bit as well about your memories of Nicholas Winton.
Yes.
So perhaps to start with, you could just fill us in a bit about your family and how you got onto the kindertransport.
Right. I was born in a little town called Turnov, near Teplice Shanov in Sudetenland. We were a Jewish family. We weren't particularly observant. We went to synagogue on high days and holidays. I lived with my mother. My parents had been divorced for many years, and I don't ever remember my father living with us, but I used to go out with him every single weekend, and we used to do all sorts of nice things. And in the summer, we used to go swimming, which I enjoyed very much. My mother ran a haberdashery store, and I used to love helping there, tidying the shelves and pretending to sell. I had a very happy childhood. Also, my grandparents, aunts, uncles and cousins lived nearby, and we saw each other very frequently. I went to the local gymnasium, and suddenly things changed. I don't quite know what happened, because I was protected from it all. But suddenly the German army invaded Sudetenland and then went into the Czech lands, and the Jews had to flee. My mother and I fled with everybody else, and we went on the way to Prague, a journey that took us 6 months, during which time I attended 2 different schools, eventually arriving in Prague, where somehow my mother arranged for me to join one of Nicholas Winton's kindertransports to England. I don't know how she managed to do it.
So when you kind of went to Prague from Sudetenland, that was in 1938, and then eventually you got onto the
Yes.
to the kindertransport
Yes.
in 1939. So can
I've got the school report with the stamps of the school and saying that I'd attended for approximately 2 months. And my last school report was from Prague.
So you spent a few months in Prague, and then you left on the transport.
Yes.
And can you remember what that was like? Actually getting on the train and all that.
During all that time, I hadn't encountered any anti-Semitism or anything that might have disturbed a child. Somehow my mother protected me from it all. Anyway, the day came that I was going to leave from the Hlavní náměstí, from the main station at Wilson Street. The place was heaving with parents and children, crying, getting onto the trains, being taken off the trains, and there was a general state of bewilderment. My father was in the background, and he just did not want me to leave. And after I'd left, he told my mother that she had made the right decision, and in letters afterwards he also said that she'd made the right decision to send me to the safety of England.
So you were 8 years old.
Yes.
And So then the journey took you from Prague to England.
It was.
By what
I
route?
remember very little of the journey.
Yeah.
I was too upset and too worried about it all, and then we travelled overnight and we landed in the Hook of Holland, and I remember getting off the train and getting onto a big boat, and as we went to up the steps, there was a lady there giving out strawberry jam sandwiches on white bread. And of all the journey, I remember that being handed this lovely strawberry jam sandwich, and I remember it to this day. And I'd only had rye bread before, so it was really, really nice. We got onto the boat and we travelled to Harwich. In Harwich, we got onto a train to Liverpool Street Station in London, and we all went into a very large waiting hall. We all had labels round our necks with our names and who was to collect us. I remember getting rather anxious because most people had gone and there were just a few of us left. And eventually Miss Florence Hall, an English teacher from the Isle of Anglesey, arrived to collect me. She also spoke German, so we were able to converse. The journey back to Anglesey was very long, and she told me that Welsh sailors had carried me from the train, the London train, and at the change at Crewe to take us to North Wales, and that they sang lullabies to me. And I think I must have slept. And when we got to Bangor, Miss Hall's brother, Rob, collected us and drove us across Anglesey to a little place called Bull Bay. And it was the 1st of July, a beautiful moonlight night, and we went along this lane, opening gates and shutting gates so that animals couldn't wander onto the road. And eventually we got to the farm and we had to get out of the car, and I can remember going up 2 fields up to this whitewashed bungalow. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning and I was really feeling very homesick. And we opened the kitchen door, and on the table was Tiger, the tabby cat. And once I saw Tiger, I knew I'd be okay. I'd had to leave my little Bambi behind in Czechoslovakia, and so I went to bed and I was happy.
When you came on the train from Prague to eventually Liverpool Street, where you met your guardian, Florence Hall, you were carrying a little suitcase. Can you remember what was in that suitcase?
I had brought... I was never a dolly person, but I had about 4 books. 2 of them were school books. One was a Hebrew learning book, and one was a Czech reading book, and the other were fairy tales. And I also brought a little locket with Moses and the giving of the law, a picture of Moses on one side, and on the other were shortened versions of the 10 Commandments.
Did you bring anything else with you?
Well, I brought my national costume with me. It's called a Kroj, a Kroj.
Okay, that was your Czech national costume.
Kroj, yes. and I still have the little apron which is embroidered. I keep that as a sort of namesake upstairs in my drawer of special things. Yes.
And did you bring any photos?
I brought a few photos of my parents and my cousins and my aunts. Yeah. But very little.
Could you then say, a little bit about your experience of growing up from the age of 8 to in Anglesey? What was it like, and did you get on well with your guardian and her relations?
It was like a different world. The bungalow was on top of a hill, and to the east, it was summer. There was the most beautiful sunrise, and as your eyes wandered round, there was nothing but sea, which was amazing to a child that came from a landlocked country. And it was the Irish Sea, and if there was a change of weather, you could see the Isle of Man, and you knew that the weather was going to change, and you soon got used to it. We had no gas, no electricity, no running water. In the summer, when there was no rain, we always had to carry 2 enamel buckets of water from the well along a lane and up 2 fields, and that was hard work. And a bath was a weekly luxury. We used to have to boil large saucepans on a paraffin heaters in the kitchen and carry them, these big saucepans, through to the bathroom at the end of the bungalow.
So you
remember
really,
it well.
So you became a real sort of Welsh rural lass.
Oh, absolutely.
And you went to school in Anglesey. Do you have
I
good
went
memories
to
of
school,
that?
The local primary school, and I was just about to start secondary school, and Miss Florence Hall, whom I used to call Mouse, because during the First World War, she'd looked after some children and they thought she was very quiet and they used to call her Mouse. So throughout her long life, I always called her Mouse. Anyway, she thought that I ought to go to the Czechoslovak state school in exile, so that if my parents were alive, I could speak Czech with them. So,
this was an interesting sort of phenomenon, this Czech school for exiles. And you went there in 1942, I think?
Yes.
Yes. And so could you say just a little bit about that school?
Yes. The school, to begin with, was in Whitchurch, Salop, and it had been a huge farm development, and the men had gone to fight in the war, so they'd allowed us to use it. And we were there for 2 years. And then when the men came back from the war, we had to move. And we moved to South Wales, to Breconshire, to a little place called Llanodrid Wells, to the Abernant Lake Hotel. And we were there till the end of the war. Both schools were very happy places, and the teachers were soldiers that had disagreed with the regime, and they had taught before the war, so a lot of the teachers were army folk. There was a very, very nice English teacher called Miss Mackenzie, and we had the rabbi was called Rabbi Stransky, and he looked after the religious requirements of the Jewish children. I
understand also that you kept in touch with some of your schoolmates from the Czech School for Exiles? I mean, in
Yes.
later life.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're still in touch. I've got a friend in Canada. I've got a friend in Sheffield and a friend in Macclesfield, and we regularly speak. I speak to my friend in Canada every week. Yeah, and she's much the same age as myself. And we've kept in touch all these years. Yeah.
So you were at that school sort of between 1942 and then until the end of the war.
Till the
And now,
school closed.
yes. So now the painful question: what happened to your parents? Because I think you were in communication by letter for a while, for a
Yes.
short while in 1939, but that came to an end.
Yes. That was by
what-
the Red Cross,
Yes.
and then it came to the end. And when the war ended, I discovered that all my family had perished. My father had remarried in the late 1930s, and his second wife, Ola, had survived Auschwitz, but she was sent to Bergen-Belsen, and my father died in Auschwitz. As far as I know, I never knew my stepmother, but she found me after the war, and she told me that she had taken me to school the first day, which I found rather hard to believe. She was a very extremely talented seamstress, and she was very clever with her hands, and she was a very nice lady. But it was somebody that as far as I knew, I'd never met her before the war.
Just coming back to your education, so you had some school experience in Anglesey and then the Czech School for Exiles, and then you went back to school in Anglesey. At a certain point, you came to this part of the world.
Yes.
In the late 1940s. So, what inspired your move to Birmingham?
Well, I'd always enjoyed looking after people, especially children. Unfortunately, the school I attended only went up to then O levels. And so there wasn't a possibility of staying on till I was 18. So I decided, since I wanted to do children's nursing, I would qualify as a nursery nurse, a 2-year training, so that I knew what healthy children were like. So I did this at the Warwickshire Nursery Nurses Training College. And we had a lovely matron called Margaret Duckett, and she was very nice. And I qualified as a nursery nurse. And my guardian, who had 7 sisters and a brother, Aunt Meg, was a health visitor, and she had been a patient at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, and she considered it a good training school. So when I was 18 going on 19, I did my general nursing training at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and then I did my midwifery. During my general training, I did 6 months at the Children's Hospital, and I just couldn't come to terms that children didn't always get better. So I did adult nursing. I worked at the General Hospital for 17 years as a sister in casualty, surgery, trauma, genitourinary medicine, and I was very happy there, and I stayed there until I got married in 1969. I also practiced midwifery during that time, because on the Ward 19, as it was called, was the ward where we had people that had either syphilis or other sexually transmitted diseases that at that time had to be separately, have their children separately, not in a general midwifery hospital. So I stayed there until I got married. Then I had 5 years off whilst I had 2 daughters. At the end of that time, I thought, I've just got to do some work. I really needed to use my brain. So I trained as a family planning sister, which I did for 17 years. I had to retire the day I was 65. It was sessional work, which fitted in very well with having young children and, running a family. I thoroughly enjoyed all my working life.
So you really made a life for yourself in Birmingham,
yes.
with work and family.
I met Philip. Yes.
You met Philip.
Yes.
And say a little bit about Philip, then how you met him and what he was doing.
Well, I met him at a club called the Coffee Pot. There were clubs for professional people all over the country. And it was very nice because you did things together. You played tennis, table tennis, went away for weekends, went walking, doing all sorts of things as a crowd. And inevitably, in the end, people got together. And anyway, Philip and I got married on the 23rd of February 1969. And he was a solicitor and later part-time judge. And we had 2 daughters, and which gave us a great deal of pleasure. And they went to the local Jewish school in Moseley.
I want to ask you now about Nicholas Winton. So I understand that you knew nothing about who was behind the kindertransport when you came over. No. Nobody did. I mean, none of the participants. So it was much later that you discovered who was behind the scheme. Yes. And so could you say how you discovered about Nicholas Winton and his role?
In 1988, Esther Ransom announced that she had been given a list of people that had been rescued by a man called Nicholas Winton. His wife had found a suitcase in the attic which contained the names and photographs of children whose lives he had saved during the war. It was just one of the many humanitarian things that Nicholas Winton had done during his lifetime, and he thought nothing of it. It was just one of the things he had done. And my daughters happened to see That's Life advertised, and they said, get in touch with the BBC, Mum, which I did. And a few days later, I went to London, to the Lime Street studios, and met Nicholas Winton and Esther Ransom. And over the years after that, I met Nicholas, or Nicky as I called him, several times. He used to attend our school reunions.
This was the Czech school reunions.
Yes.
Yes.
He came every special birthday. He had a celebration at either the Czech or Slovak embassies, and a lot of children attended. My friend from Canada used to come over, and He also, I attended the Pride of Britain Awards, where Nicky was there, and I met him at Liverpool Street Station when they did a replica journey from Prague some years ago. He came with us to our Czech boarding school, and also he came down to Český Krumlov in southern Bohemia, which was twinned with Clan Udred Wells, where the Czech school had been. Yes, over the years I met him and his daughter Barbara, and his wife Greta had given me a paperweight, a Caithness paperweight, which I still have and treasure upstairs. He was just a lovely gentleman. He had a twinkle in his eyes. He was very thoughtful. If you spoke to him, he considered very seriously what you were saying, and he'd give you a very succinct answer. We all admired him greatly, and he thought nothing of all the humanitarian things that he had done during his life. If he saw something that needed doing, he just got on with it.
I understand you've been involved over the years in a number of Jewish organisations and charities. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, for many years I hadn't had any contact with Jewish people, and I just couldn't settle anywhere. I tried Methodist churches, I tried the Church of England. In the end, I thought, don't be so silly. Get in touch with the Birmingham Hebrew congregation, which I did. And I spoke to Reverend Brooks there, and who was very helpful. And he introduced me to somebody that was a matron of Rubery, who was Jewish. And I met up with her, and I started going to synagogue, and it just felt right. I just felt I'd come home. And slowly I got to know a lot of people, and who are my friends to this day. And I started joining various organisations. First of all, it was a place called Tudor Lodge, which was a home for Jewish elderly people. So I was on that committee. That was the first one. And I joined various committees, probably about 7 altogether. And slowly and sadly, as the community began to diminish, these things all closed down, and now the last thing I was on was the Ladies' Guild, and they retired me on account of age.
But you still participate in Association of Jewish Refugees activities.
If there's anything to do, I get on with it.
Okay, that's wonderful, Lia. Thank you so much.
No, it's all right.
It's been
Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you very much.